Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. As we speak today, as we talk about economy today, Pakistan stands riddled with issues of poor governance, unfortunately a largely broken judicial system, outdated laws, complicated tax system, lack of transparency, among other issues that unfortunately confront Pakistan at this time. Keeping these issues in mind, we want to talk about where we are as far as economy is concerned, with the caretaker government doing its best to try to put the house in order. But our measures, administrative measures which are largely being taken at this time by the government, are they going to be enough to deal with economic issues? Also the money expected from the UAE and Saudi Arabia, are we, in what form, shape will it come? We'll be talking about all of these issues as far as economy is concerned, as far as the way forward for Pakistan on the economic front is concerned. A little later on, we'll also be talking about on the judgment on the NAB amendment bill as far as CJ, the Umar Ata Bandial Sahab is concerned. Of course, the new CJ being sworn in on Sunday. We'll be continuing that discussion from yesterday. Thank you so much for being with us. I have with me Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, who's a former advisor to Ministry of Finance. And we also have with us Ali Salman, who's a senior economist. Thank you for being with us today. Salman sahab, like you were earlier saying, as far as these measures are concerned that the government is taking, as far as largely administrative measures, of course, you know, they're welcome. We are looking at the dollar coming down. As on the economic front, rupee seems to be stabilizing a little bit. But are they enough? And, you know, clamping down on smuggling, of course, they're long overdue. But are they alone enough when we are dealing with structural issues, when we are dealing with, you know, a lot of other pervasive problems on the economic front as far as Pakistan is concerned?
Well, the background is that Pakistan, if you look at Pakistan's investment scenario, Pakistan macroeconomic scenario, also the situation with inflation, with exchange rate, the economy was not doing well at all. Right. It certainly needs an injection of high confidence, and that confidence can come in the long run through an institutional and transparent change, but in the short run through better policies. Now, in their wisdom, the government is undertaking a lot of administrative measures, as we are hearing the top line news here, that they are arresting the electricity thieves, they are going after the so-called smugglers of sugar, of urea. Now, all of these trends or trade, in fact, I consider smuggling as a form of a trade, only that the government is not part of that trade. Okay. Reflects, policy distortion. So in the short run, yes, I think they are grabbing some good headlines, but they are not going to solve the problem from an economic theory point of view. They're also not going to address the exchange rate issue, because that's not the, why we are seeing the distortion which we haven't seen in last 25-30 years. This distortion and this huge gap between the market rate and the interbank rate is something visibly high in last 1.5 years, and that's the result of a policy misstep. Okay. Also, the inflation has been quite high, and it seems that the impression we are getting that let's say by going after the hoarders, by going after the stockists, the government will be able to bring down prices. That happened in some commodities, and that happened, let's say, in the short run. But again, we are not going to affect the market cycle. Okay. So they're the short-term measures, but they're not going to bring the long-term economic recovery for Pakistan.
Dr. Khaqan, do you agree with what Ali Salman Sahab is saying? He's saying that these are unfortunately short-term measures which may not yield sustainable results as far as on the economic front, as far as clamping down on smuggling, as far as trying to, of course, we're looking at coming down on electricity power theft. Also, all of these measures are going to do little for a long-term solution to what the problems that we are facing on the economic front.
So, Mahrukh, if you look at the exchange rate issue in Pakistan, so in 2019, we carried out a reform because I was on the table when we did this reform. The idea was to get out of a pegged dollar and get into some kind of market-based exchange rate mechanism. So structurally, a big change was made in Pakistan where rupee was taken into more of a market-based exchange rate mechanism, as we all believed that that was the right reform to do. I remember that Australia did this reform in the 80s. So, having learned from other countries and the other, the other players at the table also felt the same. So in Pakistan, the interbank market became a very, very important market as liquidity in that market kind of drove the price of where the rupee stayed versus the dollar. So that's first important to understand. Pakistan's perennial issue of a dollar liquidity crunch puts pressure on our rupee, and it keeps on, moving mostly in one direction. For it to move in both ways, which it should, the perennial issue of the liquidity crunch that Pakistan has had on the dollars needs to be removed. In the short run, I keep saying this through debt instruments. In the long run, through non-debt creating instruments, which are the exports, remittances, and lastly, the investments in Pakistan. So you can't take that away from how this should function. But you have to remember that what was going on in Pakistan is that we've also allowed another exchange market, which we call the open market. Many countries don't have that. But Pakistan is, a kind of a unique case where we did allow this in the 1990s. But then there was a third market that had started to exist. That's purely an illegal, illegitimate gray market where the rupee was trading at values of 330, 335. Not good for our international relationship, not good for FATF. So administrative action, or what I don't even call it a crackdown, I think that is a enforcement and monitoring of an illegal activity transpiring in the country out of the normal regulatory framework of Pakistan, which I think the monetary authorities should have done long time ago. And then some of the structural issues of improving the exchange companies, where we have now done away with the B category companies. We are building the A category companies, building the corporate sector like the banks to come in and do the exchange work, as well as making sure that the paid up capital now goes to 50 million. So, a number of things have happened. This is essential for removing this open market or the gray market, which was a much smaller market, is an individual based market, leading the actual interbank market, which we want functioning much more properly. And I've already agreed that there is a liquidity issue there, which we need to overcome. But this was also breaking a continuous structural benchmark with the IMF of having 1.25% difference between the open market and the interbank market. So that has also been overcome. So I think all in all, this was a necessary action. It has also signaled the intent of the state to regulate the illegal activities of over the border trafficking, or you want to call it smuggling. And the same impact has been seen in a number of areas. We closed the Torkham border. We tied it up with the Afghan transit trade as well. We also tied it up with the gold. So a number of things have happened overall. I
But
think these
is it
administrative actions
sustainable,
have
and
to be
how
seen.
do you expect the dollar to further go? I mean, as far as rupee is concerned, do you expect it to go down further against the rupee as far as the currency at this time is concerned? And what do you think is the correct what one can say exchange rate?
So one thing is that how the rupee and the dollar parity plays depends on a number of things. I think primarily now let's see if we can make the functioning of the interbank market, where we have based the rupee on a market-based exchange rate vis-a-vis the dollar and other currencies. what has happened is that since the IMF program, we were at $8.7 billion in terms of our foreign exchange reserves. Today, we stand at 7.6 billion. So there is certain pressure there as well. So it depends how we can build this up. In the short run, there are loans that we have to get to. There are monies on the in the pledged in Geneva. There is the oil facility. There is the commercial financing, and then it depends what kind of investment flows that we are trying to target under the SIFC in the next 6 to 9 months. It depends how the 30th September targets of the IMF are done and whether the IMF funding remains smooth. And then it depends on the certainty in the country, which is, of course, the political certainty, how the election cycle plays, when we get that date. So there are so many moving parts in determining the rupee dollar parity that the State Bank the other day has given a figure that we are still about $8 billion to be picked up from different. That work has to be done. The current account has come down a little bit in August. The first 15-day numbers on the remittances are also a little better than what we were doing. So can we move the remittances back to the $2.5 billion figure? In April 22, Pakistan hit $3 billion. In July, August, we came down to $2 billion. So there are so many moving parts. Here, the work of the authorities becomes very important, both the Q block and the monetary authorities, the state bank sitting in Karachi become very important. And of course, then the long run productivity of Pakistan.
Let me come back to you. I also want to talk about the monies that are expected, it seems, from the UAE and Saudi Arabia also. But first, I'm going to go to Ali Salman Sahab. Ali Salman Sahab, when we talk about, I think a little bit, Dr. Khaqan also talked about this, but real value. I think the last Finance Minister, Ziauddin Sahab, also would talk about the real value of rupee versus the dollar. What is that real value?
Well, at this moment, I think it's very difficult to predict, and part of the problem we have landed ourselves is actually following this real value. So what Ishaq Dar was doing as finance minister was a deeply flawed policy, right? So, and his policies are are major factor where we have landed.
But regardless of the policies of the last governments, overall, as far as clamping down these measures, like you are saying, these administrative measures, so how sustainable are they going to be in coming to a market rate which is going to be sustainable? It's going to stay for a while. There isn't going to be that up and down that we saw happening also. Unfortunately, there was a lot of jumps, ups and downs.
So a major, I think there are two factors at play, and one is the overall uncertainty, around the political system. Right? So, and that has become part of our system for last 2 years.
How imperative is it? How much of a role does it play?
It's quite visible. We are actually, I think we don't need to doubt it, because we are now experiencing the results of the uncertainty. Second, as I said, and also I think IMF in fact clearly acknowledged in its last document that this is a result of policy missteps. Even though we got the SBA, but while giving SBA to Pakistan, IMF has categorized these problems which the previous government actually brought. So I think we are clearly in a deep problem right now. Okay. And when we talk about these measures, when we talk about grey economy or illegal economy, I would again like to say that this was not a problem in let's say last 20 years. Okay. Now, yes, currently there is a lot of activity happening in the grey market of dollars, of petrol, of other products, but they all can be attributed to either our taxation policy or tariff policies or monetary policy, right? So once we fix this policy, we will not observe this kind of huge differences that we have observed, right? So and frankly, I don't think that the caretaker government has any long-term mandate. The pronouncements which, for instance, their commerce minister made 2 weeks back, he said that he would take the exports value to $80 billion. Now, this is a joke, right? So we can't have this turnaround in 3 months or 6 months' time.
But again, I want to go back to the fact
So
the
that
monies that are expected, if they do come in, from the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
No, I also want to be very optimistic. I wish I can be as optimistic as people in our establishment right now are. So the investment follows a plan. Investment follow project. Investment follows incentives. The question which, for instance, Saudi authorities are currently asking, all right, we can bring money into, let's say, a new refinery project. But what is the guarantee that our profits would be repatriated? So last 1 year, this was not done. And those investors who are currently in Pakistan for a number of years could not repatriate their profits back to their headquarters. So these are some of the very fundamental questions being asked. And unless we fix these institutional incentive, I think it will be too much of an unrealistic optimism that will go into our policy perspective.
Is it unrealistic optimism, Dr. Khaqan? Do you agree it's being unrealistic when we expect things to have a significant turnaround?
Mahrukh, let me try and explain one thing in which I think generically would all agree. Pakistan's investment to GDP ratio in FY23 stood at 13.6%. Out of all the countries that have done well over the years or over the decades, be it the East Asian Miracle, China, our neighbor India, Indonesia, Vietnam. So countries similar to where we were 20 years ago. The common theme has been that they have hit an investment to GDP ratios between 25 to 35%. So no one can disagree that investing a larger part of your overall GDP is not a good thing, and Pakistan has not done well. Pakistan's investment to GDP used to be somewhere in 18% range 2 decades ago, and as I was looking at that graph, and it has come down. So now I want to improve my regulatory regime. I want to do ease of doing business. I want to go to the 5.2 million SMEs and make life easier for them. I want to excite my domestic entrepreneur. I want to excite my domestic agriculturist. I also want to sell to the world that Pakistan, besides the IMF story, which I've always been a proponent that we must stick to the IMF in the short term here meaning a couple of years. There is another story to write, which is our investment story, and someday we have to write that. We have made several attempts, and we used to do this work when we were in government, that how could we do ease of doing business. We used to work with BOI, we used to work with other areas. And we've made some movement, but let us accept that the clogged arteries of a state have not been undone to the way we want. The regulatory overhang is large. We have not been able to improve on that. So we must do that. No one takes that away. But then there is also this, that we have some privatization assets. There's also the fact that we have mines and minerals that we can go and have foreigners work on them. We can't. We don't have BHP bulletins, the kind of companies that Australia has made. So we have to go to Barrick Gold. So the third thing is that there is 9 million hectares which has been identified, which can be cultivated in Pakistan. We are cultivating about 24 million. So you have to really, really know your figures. You have to really, really know what you're trying to do. So you can't disagree with this fact that these are available options. And if you can get Saudi Arabia excited, if you can get Middle East excited, and then we always envisage that a lot of industry that was moving from China to Vietnam would also come to Pakistan. If you get some Chinese investors,
are these confirmed figures when we talk about 25 billion from the UAE and Saudi Arabia? And do we know what form this money will take, and how it will come, and the kind of results, of course, that we hope to get from this kind of money landing in Pakistan?
Mahrukh, in all the interviews, this is the toughest question you've asked me. One, I think we have to be realistic. These are envisaged discussions that have happened at a very high level between Pakistan authorities and the Saudi authorities. The Sovereign Wealth Fund. You also have to remember, I was reading an article in Wall Street the other day, and it said that the biggest players in the international investor arena will be the people who have amassed a lot of energy wealth, Saudi Arabia being one of them. And it actually had a piece on Saudi Arabia and the other players who had done well. So they do have monies. This $25 billion figure, I think, is an envisaged figure over the years with some projects that have been pitched to them. You know that in His Royal Highness came to Pakistan in 2019, and I remember being there, and we had this discussion of a refinery. That itself was pitched at a large amount of money. It still hasn't materialized. I think it still has to go through some of the issues if they get solved. So I'm just saying that that's one of these. I think there is, of course, our interest to do mines and minerals. There is our interest on the RLNG power plants. So it's a mix. Would it materialize in 6 months, year? I don't think so. But can these figures materialize in the kind of productive investments in corporate farming and agriculture? That's another area being debated. I think the very kind of details that you want to know are still up in the air. So let's see what comes through. I think that the best is to leave it to the SIFC, which in my mind is just an institutional mechanism to bypass the clogged arteries.
You think, Ali Salman Sahab, there is light at the end of the tunnel after hearing what Dr. Khaqan is saying? He's saying that, he's explained how and when. I mean, there's no timeline, and the way that this money will come at this time, of course, and how it will come, how soon it will happen, in what form. But overall, as far as the way things are going at this time, do you think that there is hope? And of course, there is always hope, and one wants to be hopeful. But the way things are at this time, the structural reforms needed as far as economy is concerned, the overall issues of misgovernance, there is a host of plethora of issues that unfortunately we have to open our eyes to confront Pakistan.
No, I also want to be optimistic about the future, and there are things to be done. In the short run, the current government, the caretaker government, of course, has this mandate to abide by the conditionalities which we have signed with IMF, right? Although IMF does not have the answers to our long-term economic problems, they are only fixated with some macroeconomic stabilization in the short run, but their path is also not sustainable. For instance, when they say that we'll make sure that there are no subsidies in the price in the electricity bills. Now, that's fine, but then we pass on all the costs or inefficiencies to our consumers, which is not the right thing, right? So also look at the budget. Are we following the budget? And budgetary discipline is another important mandate of the current government, and it is not expected. I'm surprised to see, for instance, how Punjab government is launching infrastructure programs. It is not their mandate, right? So we have to really focus ourselves in the short run within, as far as this government, caretaker government mandate is concerned. Now, moving forward, there is no dearth of wealth within Pakistan. Right. There are no dearth of opportunities of entrepreneurship within Pakistan. Even before going outside, before going to other countries, we need to untap the wealth which is locked inside. And that's frankly is not going to be unlocked by just administrative orders like a top down bodies like SIFC, right? So this may be helpful for a couple of very large scale transactions. For instance, there is a big discussion about PIA privatization, and it seems that the current government wants to do at least one transaction right, and that is the PIA privatization. Although yesterday we heard the labor unions becoming active again. But these are the complex transactions in which they may be more successful than long-term investment plans, such as the refineries and other the
these measures will probably
take
have a long-term effect
exactly,
once taken.
yeah.
Unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us. Ali Salman Sahab, thank you for your time. Dr. Khaqan, Najeeb, thank you for joining us today. We will take a short break and come back to talk about the judgment on NAB amendment law that came in yesterday. We will continue our discussion as to what and how the way forward on that and the legal ramifications of it, and how is overall the legal fraternity and the political scenario going to change after this judgment, if at all. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We have with us Barrister Ammar Ziauddin, who's a legal expert. Thank you for being with us. And Usama Khawar, who's an advocate High Court. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about the judgment that came in yesterday, continuing the discussion from yesterday. I'm going to go to Usama and then I'll come to you. Usama, one of the issues from what the judgment that came in yesterday is, of course, important what Justice Mansoor Ali Shah says in his dissenting note, and he talks about parliamentary supremacy. He talks about the fact that, in addition to that also, that he was handed over the judgment, a little perhaps, very close to when it was announced. And also the fact that, essentially whether parliamentary supremacy is being challenged through this judgment. Is it about judicial activism? How do you look at it?
Thank you. So, I think there's legal wisdom in a very old age legal doctrine, which is called political question doctrine. Essentially, what it means is that the court should not interfere in political questions. And there's a wisdom behind it. One of the two main reasons for this wisdom is, one is the courts become too controversial. They are seen as partisans. And second, in political questions, the other problem arises is the enforceability of those judgments. And I think Mansoor Ali Shah Sahab is pointing towards that broader, on a very technical terms of parliamentary sovereignty, but also the wisdom behind this political question. So accountability in Pakistan has become deeply, deeply politicized, as was pointed out by in a very eloquent, elaborate judgment by Justice Maqbool Baqir Sahab in a bail judgment on Khwaja Saad Rafiq. He laid down, Mahrukh, the accountability laws that had been coming since 1947. So what essentially his thesis was, and in a marshaled loss of evidence, was that the accountability in Pakistan is a political tool for witch hunting, breaking up parties, and for political engineering. So as a result, the process of accountability itself has been discredited. So I think in this question, going back to what Chasa was saying, that even if it's accepted that the Supreme Court has jurisdiction, the Supreme Court should avoid going into these questions. And the other is, let the people decide. What Chasa was saying during the hearings and also in his dissenting note. So we see the elections are near. If there's and it has become a political issue, and if people have a problem with corrupt politicians, let's assume they are corrupt, let the people decide on the ballot box and let those corrupt politicians let the people throw them away. It is not the jobs. It is not the job of courts and unelected guardians of the state interest to decide who are going to be the representative of the people. And unfortunately, accountability laws and the NAB law being the first, the last one in this series that had been employed since 1999 to discredit, to disqualify those politicians who would not bend to the will of political, extra political and extra legal authorities in Pakistan. And I think it was about...
Let me come back to you, Usama, on that. Let me come back to you. I'm going to include Barrister Ammar Ziauddin also in this discussion. Barrister Sahab, the two things that Usama said as far as, the fact that parliamentary supremacy, of course, is one of them, but also whether judges should interfere in questions, political questions. But, I keep on saying this, and I think that, it's also important. Why do our judges, and do you think it's, correct me if I'm wrong, do you think our judges land up in those hot waters more than they do elsewhere in the world? Or do you think that they just need to step away, or they just need to, I think we've discussed this before also, it's a difficult place to be in. And they're invariably dragged into that quagmire by one or other political party.
Yeah, I think it's a great debate. It's a debate that goes back to Marbury versus Madison. The question around separation of powers, around political doctrines, question of political question doctrine, so on and so forth. But I don't see this as a political question, honestly.
Okay.
My generation, we hold out Justice Shah as absolute rock star on the bench. His opinions on constitutional law, and lately when he rose to the apex court, his opinions on even on criminal matters and arbitration matters are widely cited, eagerly awaited. But Justice Shah is up against it because the majority opinion is well reasoned both on maintainability as well as on the merits of the case. So it's not an issue of political question doctrine, it's an issue of vires. And Justice Shah very true to his core, to his brilliance, has framed this issue as one of separation of powers and one of parliamentary sovereignty or supremacy that you mentioned in your intro as well. And it's the age-old debate, like we discussed, whether the unelected panel of elite jurists can impose their construction, their interpretation on the will of the people or that of the parliament. We await his dissent. It's just a note that he's obviously authored at this point in time, but it's going to be one eagerly awaited dissent, I feel. One more of Justice Shah's opinions that, are celebrated and
I also
read.
want to talk about the, the merits, if you look at it, and some very, legal, renowned legal minds have also said a lot on this. But as far as the NAB law itself is concerned, isn't the issue whether it's against the Constitution or not? The provisions, that's the technical issue, right? And correct me if I'm wrong. And do they, in your opinion, now that the judgment is out, are they really, contravening the Constitution in any way?
So whenever you approach Supreme Court in original jurisdiction, in addition to Article 8, 184(3 is where these questions come in, whether the issue before the court involves enforcement of fundamental rights, and the opinion of the court does address those issues in its judgment, relying on the previous opinions of the Supreme Court in Hajj scam case, in Bank of Punjab case, saying that issues of corruption or corrupt practices are indeed issues that affect public at large. There's Muhammad Yasin cited on antecedents of a petitioner, but it sort of can be or could be cited on issues, economic management or mismanagement affect the people at large. So these issues have not been left unaddressed in the opinion of the court, and they are relying on the precedent of the Supreme Court. This was the argument that was raised by the Federation as well, which is why I say whether it's going to be a review or depending on the fate of the Procedural Act, the appeal, if it is filed, it's going to be
an appeal?
So we have Monday, CP6 is fixed by the Supreme Court. And what happened in Constitution Petition 6 was the operation of the Practice and Procedure Act was suspended. So say if the court reaches an opinion that this is a valid law, then you have 14 days to file the appeal. For now, they have review. So it's not going to be a question which is etched in black or white. It's not a straightforward answer, and it is one question which is not left unaddressed in the opinion of the court as well.
Okay, fair enough. Usama, as far as the issue at large is concerned, isn't it true that this is just one case in point? There is, of course, 184(3, which again, like has been, you're saying is fixed for Monday, and we will see what the new constitution of the court and how they look at it. But overall, and this is not just pertaining to this. As far as Umar Atabandeyal Saab's court is concerned, there has been an issue with other Chief Justices with regard to judicial activism, with regard to suo motos, and that has continued over time. Isn't that true?
Then, Mahrukh, you're right, and as my learned colleague pointed out, that there are precedents. For example, Hajj corruption case, and the court in its judgment has cited those precedents. But what I was saying earlier, that there's a need to revisit those precedents, and all of those precedents, if you would see, they come from after this restored judiciary lawyers movement. So these precedents and the Chief Justices, the Office of Chief Justice, due to its administrative powers, has abused this power, and that included Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry and many of the later saviors that we saw. The last major one being Saqib Nisar Saab. So I think there's a need to bring transparency that how these cases are decided, and for that we need transparent formation of benches and fixation of cases. So in that sense, I think the Office of Chief Justice, as they say, power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. It has been used to rig elections, to undermine certain parties, and there's a wholesale need to review the cases that have undermined politics and politicians in last 15 years, especially after 2008-9. And I expect that the Chief Justice, after this law, there's expeditious hearing, and there's a transparent mechanism for adjudicating these cases, not just this one, the previous ones, because lots of damage has been done to our politics, and also most importantly, the credibility of the Supreme Court as an institution itself, and generally as the credibility of the judiciary as well. That the
Usama, the credibility, I think it's interesting that you're talking about the credibility of the Supreme Court, and I think that's also a huge issue, and as the optics of it. I'm going to go to Ammar here. Ammar, I think what Usama says when he says that, it's about the optics of it.
Yeah.
Whatever we may say, isn't it true that the optics are invariably very, very important in the world of today?
Absolutely.
And if we take a step back, to the time when, perhaps the judges were more conservative in not only their appearances, in their, the old way of things. Do you think that we've regressed from there? We've gone back or forward or whatever we may call it?
I think no sane person is going to sit here and say that we have in any way improved from those conventions or made value addition to those. An interesting bit here, Mahrukh, is Justice Shah, when he was Chief Justice of the High Court, I think he has done more to liberalize the requirement of standing than any other jurist on the bench. And now there's this journey that he sort of has come one full circle, where he's now realizing that the courts are not there to solve the problems of Pakistan, and he's said so in one of his opinions as well. And now he's there trying to write conservative opinions, trying to be a textualist. So there's this journey that Mansoor Ali Shah.
He's gone back.
So what I'm saying that he's also gone through this journey of dispensing substantive justice to coming back to far more conservatism, which we hope is the way to go about. And I agree with Ghumman Saab there as well, that we need a conservative court.
So candidly speaking, the judges need to step away from the messiah role that they have, either somehow they've confused, or they've, it's been perhaps thrust upon them, however we may look at it. And I think, of course, today's social media, all of that can't be ignored. I mean, there's a lot of that also responsible for what's happening today.
I think it's a role that they have arrogated for themselves. Lawyers movement played a significant part in it.
The press conferences outside the Supreme Court also.
Absolutely. And yes, and I think there's this appreciation that we need to step back. And this will be one of the big challenge for Justice Qazi Faiz as well. He has to reimagine, so to speak, the role of Supreme Court in this day and age, like you mentioned. So let's see what happens under his command, under his leadership to the Supreme Court.
Usama, I'm running out of time, but your comments on this also I'd like, as far as stepping away, as far as under, perhaps Qazi Faiz Issa as the new CJ, do you think that it's going to be a tough task to go back to that kind of conservative, judicial optics that perhaps are the way forward for Pakistan? In the absence of any judicial reform, we are we're awaiting that through successive governments. I keep on saying that.
Yeah, Mahrukh, you're absolutely right. So there has been this evolution, but the part of this evolutionary process is not a straight line. We learn, as he rightly pointed out, about Mansoor Ali Shah, Qazi Faiz Issa as a Chief Justice of the Balochistan High Court. He used to take suo motu notices, and there was this big debate, despite the fact that there was established law since 1960 saying that the high courts could not take suo motu notices, but he kept on. So we were all victims, or in one sense, we were learning that there was this hope after this great struggle in 2007, 8, 9, and we were all at some point were judicial activists. But then there was also learning curve. What we saw, what this unbridled activism and this interference in politics could do. And an election was rigged right in front of our eyes, and judiciary was a compelling, willing partner back in 2018. So I think
again, we are talking about a political process. Again, we are expecting, that Messiah issue, I think that when we say that, some elections were not perhaps as honest, or, judiciary's role in that, again, I think we are expecting too much, and I may be wrong, but that's my opinion, from the judiciary. Isn't that true, Ammar?
I think it's not for court to raise and settle these issues. They don't need to intervene in political matters, but at the same time, it is the final arbiter. So it's the fine balance, the elusive balance that they're trying to attain.
But I
and
think
chase.
the optics also, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much for being with us. Barrister Ammar Ziauddin, thank you for joining us. Usama Khawar, thank you so much for your very valuable time. Overall, of course, I think, the optics are extremely important in today's age of media, of social media, of press conferences outside the Supreme Court, of one party, political party of politicians coming out and raising the slogan of fairness when a verdict goes their way, the other one doing the same when it goes their way. All of these optics need to be it needs to be a more conservative overall judicial process, less about optics. And again, the judgments should speak for the judges, and the judges should speak through their judgments, perhaps is the right way of saying it. Thank you so much for joining us today on Perspective.